Hello everyone. Today we're going to get started on optical mixing. Our first project, just like our last introduction to a new media, is going to be to make a color wheel. One of the reasons I want you to make a color wheel is to get better at mixing paints, to be better at making swatches of any kind, pastel, colored pencil, any media you use. You need to practice a lot. So the color wheel is handy because we are going to try to match the pastel, the optically mixed little pieces of pastel particles that we applied to the paper, to our previous gouache color wheel, right? So what kinds of things we're going to need today? Good to have your color wheel on hand. You're going to want that. It's good to have one of these handy dandy little tools to isolate your color. It can be a smaller hole than that too. It could be the hole punched one. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll try to demonstrate it again. You're going to want your box of pastels, which should sort of look like this on the outside, but if you have a different set, that'll be fine too. I'm going to get ready here to switch over to the overhead camera, and I've started some of them, and I'm going to show you a little bit about what I want to do. One thing about pastels is they're a drawing media. So I believe there should be some sense of that in them. Many people refer to work that's made of pastels as dry paintings. So what does it mean? It has something of the feel of a painting, but it should retain something of the feel of a drawing, which means line, right? And I'm going to kind of hammer on this line thing. You'll hear me talking about that in just a second. Let's see about switching over cameras. And we'll start on this. Ooh, I missed the wrong button. Oops. There we go. You can kind of see, oh, there's a big shadow right there. Let's see if we can change the, that looks a little better, doesn't it? Yeah, much better. I should have tested first, huh? Okay. So what you see here is a bunch of swatches that I've started. You see some painted swatches because I was using my old swatches to check if my color was right. Because if they're separated by a bunch of distance of white paper, I can't really tell if that blue-green is looking like that blue-green. So I could either take my color wheel apart, just rip that piece right off or cut it right off and hold it over it. But of course I got a little bit attached to my color wheel and didn't want to just cut it apart. So I was forced to go back and look for these little schnitzels, which I think I told you guys to hang on to for a while, but if I didn't, no big deal, my bad. If you don't have them, it's no big deal. You can figure out another way to compare them closely. But you're going to need to get the color that you want to match close to your optically mixed new pastel swatch. See, that looks a little dark, right? So I leave it to you to decide how you're going to do that, but you are going to want to get it really close to it. Another thing you could do really easily, and everything, if I sound hesitant, it's because I am hesitant. And the reason that I'm being hesitant right now is that, actually I should probably leave that so I can show you which ones I'm using. Pastels are super messy, right? They get all over your hands. See that blush right there? They get all over your hands, and you won't be able to answer the phone or touch your shirt or really touch anything, because every time you touch something with your pastel on your hands, you're going to get a smudge of color, maybe where you don't want it. That's why if you have this out as your reference, you don't want it so close that you're going to get a lot of this powdered pigment on it. It doesn't really erase. It washes up fine, although I wouldn't smear it into a white shirt. I think you would be frustrated with that. But what I could do with this is I could cut this out roughly, right? And then I could hold see all that dust? It just falls off everywhere. Be ready for a mess. I put down a piece of craft paper, so it'd be easier to aid in cleaning up. I advise you to do the same. That way I can hold it right over it, right? And I can see, is that kind of close? Now, it's not going to look exactly the same, right? Because it's made up of little discrete marks. It's because it's drawing media, right? It's made of little dashes or dots or lines. And I really want to emphasize that with you. And I'm going to talk about it further. But remember that you're going to create a color, not so much by mixing globs of pigment together into a fine consistency, into an even consistency, right? You're going to let them have a little bit of their own life. That's optical mixing. So from very far away, this would look exactly like, well, maybe not exactly like that color, because like I said, it's a little too, this is darker than that. It should look very much like the blue-green the further away you get from it, right? And I'll hold it even closer, and you'll see it's actually pretty big little marks, right? They're like a 1/4 of an inch long, many of those green marks. But way down here, it doesn't look so much like it's made of discrete marks. Okay. All right, let's do a little more talking about what I'm doing. What you're going to want to do, you might open your pastel box, and I took them all out so you can't see that, but you pull this out and you go, oh, I don't have to worry, all the colors are already here. I'll just use that for my purple, and that for my red violet, and I'll use that for my red, and this will be my yellow green, and you're thinking, I'm going to be done in no time, but that's not really true. And it's not going to get you a good match to your color wheel. It's also not, you're not going to learn anything about the nature of optical mixing if you just pull a pastel out that's about the same color as, right? The rest of the world is going around and they're going, everything that is, what? Let me give you an example. I'm going to give you a great example. They're calling all of that, plus probably some of that, plus this, plus, oh, I don't have anything else. This, they're calling all these colors, which are actually very, very different from each other. They're just going, yeah, that's green, whatever, green, right? But you are in color theory class where, as you know, like tiny increments of difference really matter, right? So for you, this is not really going to do. And in fact, I'm going to just give you an example of how much it won't do by putting a big bunch of it down here. All right. Now, you see that color? Not only is it really not a very good color, there's a couple of squares in this pastel set that if I were the Lord God Queen of all, I would absolutely remove these and crush them up and bury them in a hole because they are not nice colors. They don't have any, they're way too hot. And by that I mean they look plasticky, they look artificial, they don't have any richness or depth. They're kind of a little bit neon in a way, which isn't to say that I hate everything neon. It's just to say that they're not that useful for what we're trying to accomplish here. Okay, I'm totally going at this like all different ways. You just have to bear with me. It'll get straightened out eventually. Does that look anything like that color? It does not. Right. So don't make the mistake of just using the color that looks like it would work, right? Okay, you need to know so much more than I've told you here. You're going to need to have paper to draw these on, right? I don't want you to use the Bristol board. Bristol board is too slick. Pastel, you'll see these little piles, right? That's all just pigment, just piled up there like little pieces of dust, right? You want some tooth, some texture on the paper so that this powdered pigment will adhere or stick to the texture of the paper. So use sketchbook paper. That's what I've torn out here. That's fine. I have sent you in your packet, in your little kit, you'll have some pieces of pastel paper, but these ones, although they'd be lovely to draw on, unless you have a clear white or true white, don't use these. This one is, so you can see how off the white is. It's almost, it's like an ivory, but it's really quite yellow. And I don't want to use that. I want as white of a background for this project as I can get. But if you should have a textured piece of paper from a pastel paper set or pad like this one, you can use that. Just make sure that it's a really white paper. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, okay, what did I do? The first thing I did was I started making these, and I was like thinking, well, shoot, it's not big enough yet. This is the blue-green one I was working on here. And so then I thought, oh, I've got a better idea. I'm going to get my little color wheel template from last time, and I'm going to just roughly trace some of them This is not my final thing, right? So that I can have an idea of how big my optically mixed patch of color should be, right? Because I was making them a little bit too narrow at one end and not wide enough at the other because it's a funny little pie shape, right? So I made a couple of these, actually filled the whole other sheet of paper there with this, and I think something like that is good. Even if you're not going to make the pie pieces, just make yourself an area that you're going to continually fill in that's about the same size. Otherwise, you're liable to get to a situation where you're missing a little corner and it won't make such a nice color wheel when you're assembling it. Okay, so a couple of things I want. I am kind of a traditionalist in terms of using pastels. And I like it to retain an edge, a line, a sense of its own, the integrity of the material, right? And so since I'm only going to have you do 2 projects with pastels, after that, there'll be projects and you can decide what media you want to use, right? So if you're super frustrated with pastel, the good news is you only have to use it on 2 assignments. And if you love it, the good news is you can continue to use it through everything that we do for the rest of the term. So with that in mind, I want you to use it in a kind of a particular way. And it's not so much that I need you to use it my way as that I don't want you to use it one of the ways that I see it constantly being used. And that is as a kind of powdered pigment that just happens to be in stick form. Like it would be okay if it was just a little pot of powder, right? Because what people are doing, I'll give you an example here. Let's take the blue greenish one. They are using it on its edge, maybe, or maybe even on the corner. But then what they're doing is to get rid of all this white paper that is showing. What they are doing is they are taking their finger or a little piece of a rag and they are mushing in here like this, playing with their food in this kind of lovely but annoying way. Because, why is this annoying? Because that doesn't look appreciably different to me from really any paint, right? You want this thing to have marks in it that relate to its linear qualities, right? So, and it can be little tiny dots, or it can be larger lines, or it can be cross-hatching, but let there be some line, okay? Let us see evidence of the fact that this was like a drawing implement. It was like a stick, okay? A stick of pigment. I know, if you've done any drawing, you've probably had the beautiful experience of taking your bit of colored pastel and blending out just a beautiful fade of shape, right? That lends itself to a 3-dimensional modeling just by the way you're kind of fondling the paper, right? I want us for just these 2 assignments to try to avoid that. Now, if you can't stand not smushing it into the paper, do that underneath, right? Like it would be, I would accept the idea of, and let's say I'm going to make another orange one here, and you can see that I've done this. Let's take the orange one, the darkest orange one. I would accept using it on its edge just a little bit like that, right? Not very much. And then if you had to, you could smush it into the paper. But and I know it's not a popular opinion. In fact, I can't even find anybody who teaches it this way anymore, where they want like a quality of line in it. But just this one time, try not to just be always playing patty cakes with the paper, okay? All right, so, but like I said, this is acceptable for the under layer, right? I've smushed that in there. It's like a base layer. Now I'm going to come on with my dashes of yellow and try to make a kind of an orange or yellow orange. I think this one's going to be, well, I don't know what it's going to be. I think it's the same thing as the gouache, right? You're going to want to probably make a couple of each color till you get one that you like that's a perfect match to your gouache wheel. Now, this isn't going to be super easy, right? This is a project that's sort of hard, and that is okay, but it's not great, right? one where they're a little more, there's more material on it, where it's really stacked up and gets a beautiful velvety richness. That's what you're shooting for here, right? And I don't know if you can see that because this is a little bit far away, maybe it's too far to see it. I'll try to hold it a little closer. But you're really going for something that has a kind of velvety quality to it, right? And it's from stacking up bits. You don't get it from smooshing pastel into the paper. You get it from accumulating layers and layers and layers, okay? So that's sort of the beginning of what I want to talk about. Trying to decide if we'll stop here or go on. This is important. I have a little note to myself, plus white. I don't want a lot of paper showing through, right? I don't want too much white. I want it to look pretty much like you wouldn't know if there was white paper under it. And sometimes that can be hard to get, or in the case of this one that I was doing with the yellow-green, I thought it got a little dark, right? So I used white. I put white back on top of it to bring that down to more of a tint, and you can always do that, right? You can just put in a little white. Now, what kind of shapes do you have to make here? That's really up to you. Let's make another yellow-green one. Let's do the whole thing. Let's do the whole thing. Now, you see all this messy frustration, right? Powder is everywhere. It's mixing. That's okay. It's all right if you get accidentally a little bit of purple globbed into your yellow. Don't fret about that. That could happen. It's okay. The main thing is to experiment with this totally different kind of mixing of colors, right? Okay. So I could start with kind of big lines and maybe do like a crosshatch to start me off for getting my color in there. I tend to do something that's a little less like formulaic. I kind of just start poking at it, right? Just, you can hear that tapping. That's the sound of someone mixing pastel in an optical way, right? It's all made up of these little short strokes. Actually, I don't like the way that's looking. But I would accept something that was more like crosshatch if you wanted to do it that way. In fact, I guess I'll just make it crosshatchy. Each time I drag my pastel across, it's blending some. Now that is totally fine. That is not the same as kind of smooshing your finger in it, right? I totally have no trouble with it being blended by one of these sticks. If you get it to a nice creamy mix and you've done it by by layering, I'll be happy, okay? Right. So notice how this one is quite different than the ones next to it, right? That one has sort of parallel lines. This one's got more of a crosshatch thing happening. All right, either way is fine. Some people make very tiny, discrete dots, and they stick with dots. You know, more patient people probably than me. However you want to do it is going to be great. This one is a little more dotty. I kind of like that one. We need to talk about what to do when the paper gets overloaded, because this is what happens with pastels. Like I said, there's a texture on there. Really, people that work in pastels in a kind of a less amateur fashion, like a more professional, like that's their main gig, is making pastel drawings, will use a very textured paper that is essentially like sandpaper. If you touched it, it would be like sandpaper, because you can just cram the powdered pigment into it. The other thing that people who use pastels a lot will do is they will fix or glue the particles down and then continue working. What people use is something called workable fixative. Looks like this. Or you can use hairspray. However, I don't like really either of them. Now, you're probably thinking, well, then how do you ever like have anything but the biggest mess ever here? Because it's so easy to push the pigment off of your paper so easily. Well, I tend to think that pastels should be protected by like a sheet of glass or in a frame, right? And so if I make a pastel drawing that I like and I don't want it to transfer to other things, I will use a piece of tracing paper or something as a protective cover on it, right? The reason I don't like these things, well, this one it smells terrible. I mean, it's great because you can stack more pigment on, but it changes the color. And in a shocking way, it kind of darkens it. And unless you have a really light hand, it can kind of take your color wheel from perfect to sort of a mess. So I caution you about that, although this is what people mostly use. Workable means that you can continue to draw into it. They sell other kinds of fixative that are not workable, which means if you try to draw on top, you're probably not going to get through it. It's a little bit too slick. It sort of prevents you from adding more material, more pastel line, more pigment. Does that make sense? When I say hairspray, I mean don't get any kind of good hairspray. Don't get anything that is eco-friendly. You have to get the worst kind of hairspray ever, the kind that smells terrible. That's how you know it's going to do the same job, because this stinks too. Now you want to get something like Aquanet, like a very cheap, inexpensive hairspray, and it works beautifully, and it is much less expensive than this. But the cheapest thing, if you really only care about the budget, is not to put anything on it and just to sort of live with the fact that it's a little bit fragile, right? Okay, let's stop there for now, and maybe, yeah, let's stop now, and I'll do some more colors in another section of video, another part 2. That's all.